Jackie, because I want to, if you could tell us a little bit, Jackie, what motivated you to start up the Business Health Institute, and what's it all about?
Health was that I too had experienced stress and burnout in the workplace. And I struggled to understand why, because, I was very committed, passionate about what I did. But I also knew the fallout from burnout, and I just knew something wasn't right. So I set up my own counselling practice privately. And in the process, I went to rent some therapy rooms in Garstang. And that's where I met my business partner, Julie. And she too had experienced stress and burnout in the workplace. And we got together and we said, right, let's get the evidence to show that stress and burnout does exist. And in that process, we've both learnt and understood the importance of the job demands and job resources being imbalanced. And if they're imbalanced, that causes stress and burnout. So we understand why, and we like to get to the why of what's going on for individuals and for businesses. And with that, also, I have the mental health background, which helps me work with individuals who can be at high risk. And I have worked through Business Health with some individuals who have been at high risk and who have had suicidal ideation. So I'm very passionate about the workplace, well-being, and improving the working life for every individual.
What I really loved about the Business Health Institute when we first met was how scientifically you come about this problem. I often in business, I saw there was this big divide between academia and business. If you're a psychologist, you're only allowed to work in academia. If you are a CEO or a head of HR or head of people, you're only allowed to work in business. And I feel like we missed opportunities to unite both of those two universities and help them learn from each other. So I really see Business Health Institute sitting at the intersection of these two communities, and I really love what you're doing, meaningful change. You touched there on the people that are most vulnerable here. Can you help us understand what those people might look and sound like?
Well, you know what, Ian? I believe that suicide can touch every single one of us. Nobody is immune to suicide. And the way that I look at it is that, a person is in distress and in great distress. And their way to communicate their distress is perhaps to say, I don't want to live this life anymore. And that's basically what somebody's saying when they're suicidal. Is I don't want this life anymore. I don't want to keep living it like this. They don't necessarily mean that they actually want to die. And I think it's really important to understand that. But it's also very important to listen to what people say, to pick up. So when you say to somebody, how are you today? Don't just take their word that they're fine. Look at their body language. How are they? Are they closed? Are they shut down? Are they withdrawn? And, I think it's also important to find out a little bit more about people. Are they alone? Do they have access to alcohol or other substances? And are they agitated? I call them the 3As. Those 3As are quite important when working or assessing if somebody is at risk of suicide. But we also need to be mindful that actually, sometimes we may never know. We may never know as much as we can assess and risk assess and look at all the warning signs. Sometimes we may never know. Some people are just so determined to carry out what their wishes are. But I think it's a really complex subject, and it's not straightforward. And yes, people who have a mental health illness, through depression being really a high one, for risk of suicide, but not alone. It's just because you have a mental health back history does not mean you are suicidal or could go on to be suicidal. As I started this in, anybody, it could happen to anybody.
Was that we're all vulnerable, and that it's okay to be vulnerable, because that's just a part of being human.
Yes.
And suicide and mental health can manifest in anyone, even seemingly the strongest willed people. And that's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of being human. Thank you so much, Jackie.